Hi, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Pop Politics. I'm Chris Egger. I'm one of the personalities here at Cannabis Capitol, and today we're going to forego a guest and focus more on explaining this program and the platform and kind of where we're going to take it here in the coming weeks and months moving forward. And with a focus on you, the cannabis consumer, and why this information is relevant to you. So, really appreciate you tuning in. And I think what I'm going to do to kind of get this started is to explain to you how the idea, the concept of the program Pop Politics came about. So, if you're familiar with the Cannabis Capital platform, and I hope you are by this point, and we definitely focus on entertainment, we focus on best practices, we focus on product development and product evolution. We focus on artisan craftsmanship, and so forth. But really all centered around cannabis as a topic. And this is a First Amendment driven platform, right? The right of free speech, the right for us to talk about what we love and what we want to, express to the world about the beauty of the plant of cannabis and all that good stuff. And during that process, so John Bayless and Brian Bowie Trego, who is what I would consider the co-founders of the Cannabis Capital platform and concept, they really felt like we needed to start drive into more serious topics in the sense of the political spectrum. And it's such a wide open field. And so when I was having conversations with them about how a show called Pop Politics could really, have impact here on Cannabis Capital, I realized here we are, we're in the state of California. And a little bit of history. John Bayless and I had worked together in a campaign in 2016 to legalize cannabis in a municipality here in Southern California, the city of Costa Mesa, which the passage of Measure X. And so the two of us started talking about it, and we said, listen, we are, a California kind of company, a California concept, but we have national and international reach. So we're going to start this program on an issue that was kind of coming up regularly in conversations we were having. And that was really the state of the California cannabis market space and the legislative evolutions 5 years after the revolution of adult use of marijuana act passing in 2016, and kind of what had happened in terms of creating a brand new industry overnight. California has always been first to so many things, including in 1996 with the passage of the Compassionate Use Act. And here we were with, kind of not leading the pack, but really rolling out what is, considered the world's largest, legal cannabis market space. And so, 5 years down the road, what's happening? And that allowed us to start. And if you've been following the program, and the first three programs really have focused on, an initiative that's been put together by a coalition of different folks in the cannabis industry, from the activist side and from the business and professional side. The California Cannabis Reform Initiative that's being dialogued on and considered for potentially being placed on the ballot in 2022. And that really opened up the door to this idea, like how can we create a show that talks about the serious uh, realistic issues that are politically important to both the cannabis consumer and the cannabis industry and the professionals in the industry, because oftentimes those two are overlapping. This is an industry created by consumers who found a way to, develop their voice in a political spectrum, and that goes back through history. The biggest changes that come are from societal movement. So our focus has been on creating a show where I, having experience in the political campaigning side and as an activist entrepreneur, and as someone who's served in public affairs roles for various cannabis brands. That we could have a show where we honestly took a look at these issues, and we'd look at them from what we would hope would be the perspective of an open mind, identifying common ground, and moving forward from that perspective. So, here we are now, talking to you, and when I say that, I'm here to let you know that this is how the program is going to move forward. We're on our fourth installment, and that is a great, an encouraging momentum builder for us. The first three, we had Sean Kiernan from Weed for Warriors. Weed for Warriors is championing the California Cannabis Reform Initiative coalition, so to speak. And they've really put forth this idea that there's two key issues in California cannabis that are politically important to be considered by consumers as well as the constituents and voters of the state, which relate to the high nature of taxes that are being placed on that. And we're going to get into that a little bit during this program as I move out of this intro. And then secondly, local control, which is obviously something that was very important to John and I and to the team here at Cannabis Capitol, and the role we played here in Southern California in helping different municipalities. There's a lot of connectivity to that reality. Local control means that there's maybe like 500 different regulatory subsets underneath this big statewide legalization program. And that confusion has just been so daunting and challenging for so many people to wade through. And then, of course, in our larger metropolitan cities, we have Los Angeles and we have San Francisco, and they have, in Oakland and San Diego. I'm here in Orange County. But these local ordinances, and then of course the high level taxation, politically, it may have gotten us to the dance, so to speak, to have this high rate of taxation and this great societal benefit come from our industry. But it's also put a burden on the consumer, right? So it's a topic that we need to talk about because for the past few years we've been trying to say, hey, we're legitimized. Well, the proof is out now, right? Cannabis is a product that has its place in the rightful societal dialogue. Whether or not you choose to consume cannabis, I think most people can agree that there are medicinal benefits, there are adult choice, realities that make it comparable to the idea you don't have to drink, you don't have to consume cannabis, but you should have the right to do so as a responsible and productive member of society. And I think the reality is it's the responsible side of it that I think makes the political voice of cannabis so much more compelling in this day and age, because we really have shown and demonstrated that responsibility. And then finally, this idea that that we could be taxed and taxed and taxed, so that money grows on trees, literally and figuratively, in the industry that we're in. And what that has done to actually foster and continue an illicit market that I hate to call a black market anymore. I think it's really a consumer-driven reality. And how do you capture, a growth in revenue potential for societal benefit from cannabis? So that was an issue that was important to me. And when I say to you, our viewing audience, is that if there are issues in the political spectrum that you think need to be dealt with, we only are going to be talking to issues related to cannabis, and that can cover marijuana, it can cover hemp, and it can cover the intersection of those two. I know that people will say that cannabis has its subsets and marijuana is, the THC, kind of adult use and for medicinal benefit, the hemp, the non-THC, CBD related products. They're very parallel industries, but sometimes they're at odds. When hemp and cannabis are in outdoor grow environments, that can be put those two issues at odds, right? So when I say that, we are going to focus on what we believe are issues. Now, why would California's system of local control and taxation be relevant to maybe a national or international audience? Well, I'll tell you, in the state of New York right now, as they are crafting their regulatory structure and their oversight, they are dealing and wrangling with a lot of these same issues. And there are a lot of budding cannabis entrepreneurs and folks who are in the state of New York, right, who can learn from what California's been dealing with. And I would hate for our industry to crave and desire acceptability to the point of where we would tax ourselves out of this ability to actually be able to function. And there's very few industries that can survive over taxation. And what does that mean? Well, that means that, early on, we were paying sales taxes. Fiona Ma and the Franchise Tax Board in the state of California were very happy to talk about the fact that for anyone who was operating in a Prop 215 compliant model prior to 2016 in the AUMA, they were paying California sales taxes. And those revenues, obviously met a certain burden of participating in society, right? However, AUMA did lay down, a pretty significant, I think it's almost 33% of the price of the cannabis purchased through a licensed and regulated shop, 33% tax. Now, traditional sales tax at 10%, right? So you're talking about a product now that is being taxed at a level. Now, that's not just from the state. So in each individual municipality, right? So how is this such a key issue for the first few episodes of Pop Politics? It's because it affects every cannabis consumer in the state of California, and in a way is also affecting consumers in New York State and in other states and other locations, as we'll come to find out, I'm sure, over time as we explore these themes. So it was really relevant to us. But maybe for some of you, it might be the social equity and the reality of how that needs to be legislated more effectively. And for others, it's going to be issues. Ryan's Law is something that I know that the OC Normal chapter has been very focused on building up some recognition of in the legislative, and the fact that Governor Newsom had decided not to sign it. And I think that there's some real issues out there that may not be the primary ones that we're thinking about here, but we are a consumer-driven platform. And with the First Amendment, right, we're not going to try to squash any type of dialogue. We want to find the voices that are sometimes the counterpoint to some of this dialogue. However, the one thing we can all agree on, our taxes are too high. That doesn't matter what you're paying tax on, gas tax or sales tax. And more importantly, that our industry craves a continued growth in the state, that we believe that the local control and the inability for people to move forward. So one of the things I personally did that kind of qualified me for this is over the past year and a half, and Eric Eisenhammer, who is the third guest that we had on, who is a tax expert, and I had created an organization called Smart Leaders for Smart Regulations. And really what we were trying to say is, listen, the time has come, right? If you're a smart leader in your community, to realize that with smart regulation, that cannabis and the professional industry and the access to cannabis can be something that will benefit your community in many different ways. And that includes, the tax revenues that are generated through even just the economic stimulus of local employment and spending of money in the community, but more importantly, just sales tax in general, right? The taxes that any business generates in a community, right? But it also means that on a local level, that we're going to have to take a look at bringing the political process city by city over time. And 2022, I think, is going to be a watershed year for that to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of cities that we're trying to, activate people. I talked to Candace Hawes, so that was the second guest here. And Candace Hawes was the founder of the OC Normal chapter, and she was also one of the first in California that I was aware of to pass a local municipal ordinance after the California Supreme Court had ruled in 2012 that the time, place, and manner of businesses could be regulated by a city. And while it was not illegal to operate within the Attorney General guidelines at the time, a cannabis dispensary, they could be banned from a community. So that created a huge, kind of roadblock, so to speak, to best practice operations of a legal cannabis dispensary in California at the time. However, the judge also in his ruling pointed out that the citizen initiative is a vehicle available to the constituency of Californians who may not feel that that was an appropriate way. So from that point forward, right, ballot initiatives have been qualified in cities throughout California, and that's part of our political process. It doesn't happen that way in every state. However, in California, I know that it led to Measure CC, which was qualified by OC Normal back in 2013 and 2014, led to Measure BB, which actually opened up the door for Santa Ana to do its regulatory infrastructure, right? So that allowed for the first wave of, I believe it was 20 medical dispensaries to be opened in the city, and it was a lottery, and it was it was a national, international news story, and rightfully so, because Orange County was considered a very conservative county, and there's a relevancy to moving into this discussion on Santa Ana. So the first 3 episodes of Pop Politics focus specifically on those actual events and what it means to today's consumer, right? So here we are 5 years down the road, 7 years down the road, and what does that mean? Well, I had the other day the pleasure of picking up a local Fullerton newspaper and reading about the Orange County Grand Jury's findings, investigating what they call the monopoly of cannabis, of licensed cannabis facilities in the county. And that's how they got the entry point into being able to study this, right? They wanted to study whether or not this was a monopoly, that the city of Santa Ana was the only place where retail cannabis was being sold in adult use, by the way, not medicinal, but in adult use format. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was the focus on the tax revenues. So, in the years that there has been adult use cannabis in the city of Santa Ana, there's been $20 million of municipal tax collected from cannabis consumers, which means that's probably, you know, 3% of what the sales were going. But the reason that that to me was so dramatic, it's two or threefold. One is the consumer is being taxed to enforce against the portions of these funds are used for three different purposes. One is for youth programs, and I think we can all agree that youth programs are great, and the city of Santa Ana deserves to have its community enriched. And we in the cannabis culture have always been about enriching culture, right? We've always been about a culture. I heard someone say the other day that when you see a circle of people and someone comes in to join and people are passing and smoking cannabis, people don't shuffle away from that. They open the circle up and they usually try to include that person in the process. And I think that that's a big part of, politically motivations for us to be kind, compassionate, and giving when we get into this political spectrum. But however, it's like we can give, 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 give. But at what point does that give us into an inability to function as a professional industry moving forward? So when I looked at this and I said, okay, so that's a third of that. A third of it is on enforcement against illicit market activities in the city. And I could understand that because those revenues, the public safety officials in our state have struggled and struggled and struggled since 1996 when the Compassionate Use Act was passed to understand the spirit and the letter of a very generalized law. So once AUMA and the MCRSA were put into place by the legislative bodies and by the voters of California, it created an opportunity for them to now normalize relationships with the cannabis culture, right? And to stop focusing on that nature. And then the third area is the general fund for the city. But these are specific taxes. So that $20 million is not the only tax that has been placed upon the consumer purchasing cannabis in the city of Santa Ana. So if you can imagine, the reason that these issues become important and the reason that we wanted the California Cannabis Reform Initiative to be something that we really dug into is because California is a state of 40 million people. We are a country unto ourselves. Yet there's another state, on the other side, on the the West Coast and the East Coast, you have New York State, which is diving into these same dialogues right now, but they have not landed on it yet. And these are political topics. They're really serious. They're really important, and we need to start as a you have the ability to change the world every 2 years through the electoral process in California. And they always say if you don't like something, you try to change it, and you change it for the better what you can, and you keep what's right when you do. And I think there's a lot of right that's been going on right now. So when I talk about right now in politics, here in the state of California, we have a recall against a governor who's been very supportive of cannabis, regulation and legalization here in the state of California. But at the same time, there's been a lot of struggles to understand some of the decisions he's made. And in this particular program, on this particular context, we're only focusing on the issue of cannabis. So you could be a right-wing Republican, but say Gavin Newsom has been good for cannabis. You could also say, that cannabis needs to be, looking out at the world and say, hey, are our taxes too high? Do we need to become a more, less liberal and more conservative mindset and saying that burden on the consumer of cannabis should not be, as high as it is right now. And that's one of the reasons the illicit market remains and that people pursue outside of the regulated market space. And why isn't that access growing? And those are key issues that we're going to explore here, and we think they're really relevant. But we also know that there's going to be other issues that are relevant. So we're looking forward to your comments. We're looking forward to your outreach. We're looking forward for guest suggestions, right? We're looking for also guest hosts. I'm not going to be able to be here for every week, but I'm going to try to be because these issues are that important to me. Like I said, I started as an activist, and then I became an activist entrepreneur, and then I worked in the industry, and now I'm here at Cannabis Capitol because I honestly believe that this is a place where ideas are being shared, where people are interacting, where we are as a culture starting to emerge and come out there. Now, in the future, the political activism that you should expect from this show will be giving you clear information, qualified people who are speaking to that information, and to try to motivate and encourage a thought beyond, what I would consider lifestyle and consumption and product driven conversations. How does cannabis interact with the world around us? And that's where the politics of cannabis come in. We called it pop politics and not puff politics, because puff politics, while we all puff puff pass, and great ideas come from that, in politics, a puff piece is something that's kind of like, it says a bunch of nothing, right? We wanted this to be focused. So we went with pop politics for that very reason. And that means a lot of things to a lot of people. But one thing it means to us is that we care about cannabis here at Cannabis Capital. We care about the cannabis consumer. So oftentimes we're gonna sound a little bit more activist than not, but that's okay, because we still need that. We can't forget where we came from as an industry. We also have to know that to really get to where we want to be as an industry, that we're going to have to spend some time on these heady, more serious topics. So I want to say thank you to John and Brian for really giving the cannabis culture this voice, this pop politics voice. I also want to say to any of you out there, if there's people that you think that we need to bring onto this show, then please give us an insight to who those people are so that we can extend invitations for them. We're queuing up some folks. We're queuing up some dispensary owners who spent some time in their local communities where they were founded, talking to them about how they went through the process of getting a local ballot initiative passed in a municipal environment, not at a statewide environment. We're going to continue to have guests that have been, frontline in the struggle, so to speak, and in the fight, and galvanizing support. And then we're also going to start reaching out to other states, and we're going to start bringing in folks who are talking about their experiences in New York is going to be a big one of them, Oklahoma, some of the other ones where we're seeing regulatory rollouts happen and changes are happening. And having them, be able to share what they're going through and what's relevant in those communities with someone like myself and other experts here in California who have been there, over the past 7 to 10 years doing this. So, in all fairness, today was a day where I wanted to have this type of conversation for this program to let people know that this is something that's going to be an ongoing project for Cannabis Capital. We want to see you be part of that ongoing story. We're going to, at some point, start to try to galvanize support for certain things that we believe will, touch cannabis consumers in an appropriate fashion. We're going to try to bring you real, credible news, but more importantly, dialogue and thought about these issues. So for me, coming out of this particular mindset, over the past 3 weeks, we've been railing on the high taxes, and then to look at how Santa Ana took those taxes and actually divided them and spent them. Now I'm sitting here going, okay, well, I'm really proud of the cannabis culture for supporting the youth of the city of Santa Ana, a city that lives in a certain amount of poverty and so forth. And if my cannabis consumption and purchase could support knowing that kids are getting after school tutorial programs, or being able to have summer activities and things like that nature, of course I feel good about that. But at the same time, is it suppressing the growth of a regulated marketplace because we're the only ones being taxed that way? Like, why is it that only cannabis consumers are contributing those funds? Why isn't there a 1/4% sales tax increase across the entire city of Santa Ana so that every business, cannabis included, can share in that? And that's where I think the pop politics comes in, when we're going to be a voice for the political voice of the cannabis movement. Is we have to say, listen, at what point are we going to be equal, not separate but equal members of the business community, equal members of the community at large and in general. And I think that these questions are important. So over the next couple of weeks, expect that we will continue to hammer on these themes of why are taxes too high and what can be done about it. Why is local control not growing or not allowing our industry to grow so that access for quality cannabis products that are through the regulated market that are contributing to the greater thing, to the greater good of the cannabis consumer as well as the state and the revenue side? Why those are important issues is because they're important to consumers, they're important to our industry, they're important to the longevity of our industry, and they're very specific. When you start getting into why I'm inviting, interaction and stuff like that, is because social equity does have to be part of that dialogue as well. And social equity covers a host and a range of things from, a broad spectrum of topics that I maybe don't have as much hands-on experience with, but I do know that there's going to be a need to dialogue about it, and especially because it plays a huge role in the political spectrum as to how our industry is rolled out, and it's going to play a huge role in the state of New York as well, which is a big deal for that state because they're just writing their laws. So I want this program to be that resource, and we're looking for those contributions from your audience. And then finally, there's a whole nother, a million spectrums, consumption and workplace issues and stuff like that. And as legislation comes up, I'm certain that there will be a reason for us to focus on it, right? But meaningfully, I don't want people to get thinking that we have a one-track mind. We are an open forum, and as we bring guests on, I think you'll start to see that they're going to bring some direction to us. But expect us to talk about consumer-oriented issues, the high price of the taxes on a consumer's purchased cannabis products, number one, and number two, access. And one of the things is if you had more access to legal stores, tax revenues from just sales tax alone would be growing. So there's some truth to saying that we needed to pay some dues to be at the table. But now that we are at the table, when are we going to stop being separate and start being equal members of the business community? So I want to say thank you to you all today. I'm going to keep it short and sweet at that level. I hope you can appreciate the sincerity of my gratitude for being able to be here. The Cannabis Capital team, the Cannabis Capital family really wants this platform to be a repository for a dialogue in the moment, in the now, where the history is being made. There's going to be a lot of programs that you're going to see that delve into issues around this. You're going to talk to a lot of pioneers. You're going to have people who are artisans, people who are entertainers. But at the end of the day, pop politics is going to be solely about political activism, political issues, and what's happening here in the now that can make a better future for this industry. And I want to say thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you again next week for another edition of Cannabis Capital's Pop Politics.